The effect of pesticides, specifically neonicotinoids, on Apis mellifera. What are neonicotinoids? Neonicotinoids are pesticides that are used to preserve crops. In fact, these insecticides are predicted to preserve nearly 1/5 of crops, including many staple crops such as maize and fruit and vegetable crops. One of the most common neonicotinoids is known as imidacloprid, which is used by many. Neonicotinoids can be lethal when ingested by insects due to disruption in an insect's nervous system. How do neonicotinoids relate to Apis mellifera? Neonicotinoids are some of the most toxic agrochemicals to insects, specifically the honeybee, and are a great threat to these insects due to ingestion of these chemicals in pollen and nectar. When ingested, the bee can experience a slow death by small amounts of poison and experience other sublethal symptoms. This figure shows how neonicotinoids are spread throughout the hive from both pollen and nectar foragers. These foragers bring back pollen or nectar that has been contaminated with neonicotinoids, thus causing other bees to consume the poisoned food. Different effects. Neonicotinoids have two different effects on Apis mellifera: lethal and sublethal. Lethal effects obviously result in the insect dying after ingesting these chemicals, while sublethal effects include a decrease in bees' performance, behavior, or growth, along with other symptoms as well that are not lethal. Lethal effects. Fortunately, these graphs show that neonicotinoids, specifically imidacloprid, seem to have no effect on the survival rate of honeybees that were in the laboratory or in semi-field conditions. What does this mean for honeybees in nature? If this study is accurate for bees that are present in the environment rather than in the lab or in semi-field studies, then this shows that neonicotinoids are not responsible for the poor survival rate of adult honeybees that is seen in instances such as the colony collapse disorder. Sublethal effects. While it is good news that the neonicotinoids are not solely responsible for deaths in honeybees, research shows that a honeybee's performance drastically decreases the more it is exposed to these chemicals. Furthermore, other sublethal effects have been shown, such as memory impairment, loss of appetite, and delays in returning to the hive. Further sublethal effects. This model shows that with the exposure to these chemicals, the bees experience a loss of mobility after a period of time. This shows that when exposed to these chemicals, bees can experience detrimental symptoms, such as loss of control over movement. Furthermore, this study found that after a 2-hour period of exposure, there was no recovery for these bees. How these neonicotinoids affect the waggle dance. Research also shows that there is a decrease in the amount of waggle dancing after foragers had visited crops that were infected with neonicotinoid. Ultimately, reduction of waggle dancing can lead to a decrease in the amount of foraging in a hive, possibly causing a decrease in the amount of food stored. Effects on colonies. Unfortunately, the effect of neonicotinoids is not just on the individual bees. Neonicotinoids and other pesticides are responsible for driving infections and diseases that lead to colony losses. Ultimately, while the evidence might show that there are not lethal effects on bees from neonicotinoids, these pesticides promote parasite infections and diseases that lead to colony failure. Why does this issue matter? The detrimental effect that neonicotinoids have on Apis mellifera is something that should be further studied and fixed in order to preserve the bee populations. Not only are bees experiencing sublethal effects that ultimately can lead to poor performance or death, but this also has an effect on the amount of crops that get pollinated by these bees. Bees are responsible for pollinating a large amount of crops. However, when they are poisoned by these neonicotinoids, they are unable to accurately perform. What has been done? In some countries, such as France and Germany, there have been government mandates and restrictions on the use of neonicotinoids to help preserve the bees in their populations. However, the use of neonicotinoids is still quite frequent as they play an essential role to preserving crops.